Welcome back to Why Care. I'm Reshma and Saujani with Tim Allen, and we have an amazing episode for you this week. We got literally some of the smartest minds in the space here with us. Later in the episode, you're going to hear from Betsey Stevenson and how we got to this place. After that, we're going to have some fun getting into why our leaders in Washington have or will not or have not do what they need to do. But first, Tim, let's catch up. What's happening in parenting this week?
Hi, my friend. I have to tell you, it is one of those. So the flu has gone rampant. And last night I was up pretty much every hour on the hour dealing with, the crying child, sick kind of, it's funny. They sleep in bunk beds now. And it is the exercise of trying to keep one asleep and making sure you don't make too much noise while the other one is.
I got bunk beds too.
Oh, well, the other one's projectile vomiting. Like, I don't want to be too graphic for the audience, but literally I'm talking exorcism moment last night. And I was like on my hands and knees at 3 a.m, cleaning it all up, patting his back and being like, everything's going to be okay. And in my mind, I'm going, it's not okay. I don't know what's going to happen. Like, this is not okay. So yeah, I would say it's a really fun time right now. But hey, that's the joys. I actually had that thought last night where I was like, have you ever thought that you're like, they say have kids. They say it's the joy of your life. They say this will be great. And at 3 a.m, I was like, I'm reconsidering all of those decisions. Like I don't know if it was the right one. I was like, wow, what my life would have been like.
Well,
if I wasn't
especially having them later in life, right? Because I'm tired. This is when I'm supposed to be like sleeping or like drinking margaritas, whatever, which one. I'm doing neither.
Right.
So
I didn't do the sleep during my 20s, right? Like I was like, oh, let's live my 20s all and now that, I'm in my 40s, I'm like, why did I not take advantage of that opportunity? So I totally, yes.
Absolutely.
But how about you? What's going on in your world? How are the kids? How's
life? My God. I dropped my kid off at school when they didn't have school. That was not fun. I'm just so overwhelmed with work, like especially last week, right? I'm fighting a book banning fascist all week. So
I heard you, rebel rouser.
I am like, this call, this thing. And I guess I had signed my kids up for a 3-day-a-week program, but I thought it was 5 days a week. So, on Tuesday when he does not have school, I took my little 2.5-year-old to school, run through with my earpods on, right? Then the teachers know me, so they're like totally used to it, right? And they're like, put him in his room. And it's funny because I walked in the classroom, they didn't have his cubby ready. They had like some other kid's picture. And so the teacher was like, no, it's okay, Reshma. I'll just move Sean's size picture here, Yeah. And she was so sweet. She knew I was dropping him off on the wrong day, but I would think she was like, am I confused? Or like, but let me leave him there. And then I run out, right, before anybody can stop me. And like, they're calling me, but of course I'm on 9 different calls. So I'm not picking up the phone. And then realize they're like, just wanted to let you know he doesn't have school on Tuesdays or Fridays. So we'll keep him today because we can't get a hold of you. But just for next time. I was like, this is how like I am not balancing everything. Like I didn't even know what days I had signed my kid up for school.
Wow. Yeah. No. Hey, it's funny. We've talked about this before. There's little grace in parenting when there's a mistake made because it is like a mistake. Like you're dealing with someone else's life, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I left Sai at school, didn't have school, right? Like you're like living this moment of like, what is going on? And it's so personal. It's like, how do you not make it go like I screwed up? Because like, look, it's like there's no room for error in parenting. Right. And it's like, it's crazy.
And it's so relevant to what we're talking about today, which is also like, now I'm like, what am I doing on Tuesdays and Fridays with him? Yeah. Right. Because I had thought that I had school every day and I was like covered, right, from like 9 to 1 or whatever. So it's also just like, again, how the system needs to just be fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to your point, Hayden's at home sick. We don't have emergency backup care. Like there's not like a thing where I'm like sitting here going, oh, I have this all mapped out and planned out at 4 a.m. and now I'm like trying to manage. Luckily, I have a job that allows flexibility for me to be able to work from home and but like a lot of people do not. Like this is not one of those things that's common. And I go, this is you're right. The system is just broken in a lot of ways in that regard. And we've talked about that.
And it's hard. I mean, I was so lucky to see my friend Ketanji get sworn into the Supreme Court, on Friday for her ceremony.
That's right.
And my husband was going to bring down the kids because there's a bunch of events during the day. Of course, our childcare, our babysitter gets sick. She was going to come with us. So now we're like, okay, wait, like this is a big moment. Like, how does Nahal get there? Leave the kids at home. Who's going to take care of them? How do we then to get back from DC? It's just, but it's like that is just, again, I think what parents are experiencing and juggling every single day.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it is one of those things. I mean, it's just no matter how big or small the moment, like it is just parenting is the literal full-time job. It is a full-time job full of surprises at every moment around every corner. It's like you cannot map out life, which has not done, I think, me any good because I'm really bad at it. So I wish I was better. Oh, but great. Cool. All right. Well, I know that we have incredible guests today, and I know that we're going to talk about a lot of amazing topics. And, before we get into the interview today, I want to do a little table setting, and I want to lay a couple some of the facts out for everyone, just to level set, because I think a lot of this is known, but I don't think a lot of it's said very often. So, one of the first things that we want to talk about is inside the pandemic, half of American families lived in a childcare desert. A lot of people ask me even today, what is a childcare desert? What does that mean? Definitionally, childcare deserts are areas where there is not childcare available, meaning daycare, meaning nanny, meaning full-time babysitting. It is a literal desert in order to find childcare. If you're not related to someone who can help you take care of a child, finding childcare is next to impossible. So half of Americans live inside of these childcare deserts, which I think is an amazing stat for us to keep conscious of, because those of us who live in major metropolitan areas go, oh yeah, we'll hire a babysitter, we'll get a daycare down the street. That doesn't exist for the majority of Americans. And that means for every 3 kids, there's only 1 daycare slot available. And that stat in and of itself just is mind-blowing if you think about it, right? And also from the pandemic, more than 16,000 daycares have permanently closed. So not only during the pandemic was there already a pre-existing condition of this childcare desert, you had 16,000 additional daycares closing, which really forced childcare deserts to become more expansive. It actually exacerbated the issue that was already in existence today. Huge wait lists. We haven't talked about this before, but I remember there was an article about 3 weeks ago where there was a daycare opening in the middle of Arkansas, and there was a line that lasted overnight. Bless you, by the way. Overnight, that then went into the parents waiting close to 18 hours just to get a single slot inside of a daycare. That was just crazy. It's just crazy that parents are having to do this.
Wow.
Yeah. Costs keep going up. You talk about daycares. With inflation, with supply and demand, not only are there less slots available for kids in order to be able to participate, but there's also now more expense hitting the family. Daycare rates today, the average weekly rates are around $226. That's up 5% since the pandemic.
Unbelievable.
Nannies are up significantly as well. They're at $694 with what a much deserved wage increase and labor pool, but it's still more expensive hitting the bottom line for the parents. And finally, there's the care workforce. We've talked about this extensively, you and I, Reshma. People who do some of the most important work for our economy, they're underpaid, underappreciated. They don't have benefits. They don't have portability of benefits. Many of them are paid under the table. But there's a huge demand, and it continues to grow. And so we are really faced at this moment in time with how do we continue to find opportunities for families to find care? How do we really empower parents to be able to have care for their children while they're working or while they're having these activities or unexpected events that we were talking about earlier? And how do we meet that demand? How do we continue to get more people into the labor workforce and make it an attractive job? Make it a job that is a profession that people gravitate to and really can take pride in getting paid the right value and getting the benefits that they deserve. It's a bad cycle. It's a vicious cycle.
It's a bad cycle.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the big part of this is like Americans already can't afford childcare, and then we're not paying our childcare workers enough. So we don't have enough people in the industry. I mean, that stat that always, like, when we say we pay our zookeepers more than we pay our childcare workers, always just like blows me away. So I'm just so excited to hear from Betsey about this later. But what is the solution, to this crisis?
Yeah. Is it one solution? The thing I'm always thinking to myself is, how do we do this in a multi-pronged approach that we're able to tackle this simultaneously, right? Build Back Better was supposed to do that. There was a lot of activities that are supposed to do that. I know we're going to get into a lot of that today, but I'm really fascinated to hear what Betsey has to say, because I think that as we can start to map out this uncharted territory, it really is going to be interesting to see what actions we can take collectively in society and what are the things that we can actually invest inside of. I know it's one of the things.
And how do we move?
No,
No,
please.
go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
No.
Finish your thought.
I was going to
Come
just
on,
say,
Tim,
hey, I was only going to say, I know when you and I have talked privately, this is one of the big reasons that caused us to get this podcast going. It's how do we give a voice to what's happening out there in the caregiving community, the caregiving world, for both families and caregivers themselves? And how do we really come up with solutions as a collective? How do we talk about these things?
Yeah.
So,
and how do we change culture? One of the things as a mom, I feel like people are like, well, you figure it out. You decided to have a kid. It's your choice, your problem. It's not the government's problem. It's not your the private sector's problem. It's not your employer's problem. It's your problem.
yeah.
And so how do we move out of, I feel like the difference is like, my friend Alicia Gupta and I were on we did a panel together. She had this amazing slide about, and how, the United States has the largest amount of women participating in the workforce, but then the least amount, right? When you who are kind of the most amount that are coming out at the end, and it's because of childcare. And other countries have figured out how to solve this problem from a societal perspective, but we keep putting it on the individual to solve, and we're not making any progress. And so I think deeply what is embedded in our inability to pass policy on this is because we still think it's in the personal reign. It's still a personal thing that government is not supposed to get involved in. And how do you change that? And I think Betsey's going to have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually think a lot of people, both parents and non-parents, share that point of view. I hear a lot of parents, I call it parent-on-parent crime, which is they will say, oh, well, you chose to have kids, or I have it figured out. And it's like, that doesn't necessarily, because you have figured it out, doesn't necessarily mean it is fairly figured out for everyone else. And I do think that we have to start to look at it from a lens of, guess what? Okay, yeah, chose to have kids. Does that not mean we can't have a structure that actually supports us having a career and having a life and having everything that we like? It's not mutually exclusive, people. It's not mutually exclusive. You could have it all, that's the thing.
Exactly.
And
we can invest in things that we may not also have. I may not be a parent, but I may want to make sure that parents are adequately cared for.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that, because a lot of it becomes back to the personal point, right? It's, if you don't have a kid, what's in it for me? And I know a lot of my friends who don't have children are like, well, that's a you problem. And I'm like, it is a me problem, but one day it's going to be a you problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And you want me to handle it now, right? Or your sister's problem or your family member's problem. You will someday face this problem in some degree of your life. So help me now, or deal with it later.
Yes, exactly. or like, you're going to deal with it later. All right. Well, let's bring up Betsey. So Betsey Stevenson's our first guest today. She is the former chief economist for the Department of Labor, professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan, a renowned expert on care in America. She is literally one of the most brilliant people I know, period. Every time I get an opportunity to speak to her, to hear what she's saying, to read something that she's written, it just makes me feel smarter, right? I'm like, okay, I feel informed, and I feel like she sparks ideas and new ways of thinking. And I think that is really, 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 really important. So welcome, Betsey.
Thank you for having me. It's great to talk with you.
Awesome.
It's great to talk to you too.
Yeah, we're really excited. I can tell you. It's one of the things I've been looking forward to for a while now. So thanks for making it.
I feel like there's so much to talk about.
So much to talk about. So let's start with the grim picture. Right. So Tim paints this really grim picture. Is it true?
It's actually worse. It's worse because what we now layer on, right? I feel like, Tim, you painted the picture I've been talking about for years. And now we got to layer that on to an economy that's just had the highest inflation we've had since the 70s. And guess who's not getting the pay raises? Childcare workers. So maybe that's good for families. The cost of childcare is not rising as fast as the cost of everything else. except for who wants to do that job? I mean, if we got to, I mean, we're sort of stuck in this like awful place, where, I was testifying in front of Congress, and one of the women there was somebody who talked about workers walking out of their childcare center and taking a job across the street because it paid better, and hating that, wanting to keep working in childcare. But how do you do that when, it's paying less than anything else? And I think that's just been, we got to see the wages go up. And if the wages are going to go up, the prices are going to go up. And if the prices are going to go up, how are the families going to afford it?
So how?
That's our problem to solve, right? That's why this is not a personal problem. It drives me crazy when I hear people describe this as a personal problem. I mean, it's sort of uniquely American, right? It's like when you have a baby, it's like that's your new toy. And then we don't admit that person to the human race until they turn 18. And then all of a sudden government's supposed to have something to do with them. Your baby's not your toy. It's a person. And government's supposed to represent all the people, including the littlest people. So, I mean, it's not a personal problem. It is a societal problem where we're trying to think about how we take care of people. That's like, saying that people starving to death in retirement is a personal problem. You chose to get old.
Right.
Could have died. Right? Like, that's crazy.
Right.
So Betsey, take us through the history a little bit, like the Lanham Act. Is that how you say it? Was it always this way? You know what I mean? Is there something about rugged individualism, deep American culture, American history that has put childcare in that position? Walk us through the history a little bit, legislatively.
Well, I mean, legislatively, there's a bunch of times where it looked like we were going to get childcare and then we didn't get childcare. And I mean, there is a sort of, I think in the US, it's always the case that these kinds of policies have had knife edge moments where we could have gone the other direction. And we'd be living in a totally parallel universe right now with like happy kids who've been invested in. And, sometimes the knife's edge goes what I would call the right way, right? The US was the first country to make high school free and publicly available. The rest of the world laughed at us and said we were crazy. Why do all these people need high school? That's a fancy education. And then by giving access to free and universal high school, this crazy thing that no other country did, we set ourselves up to have the fastest economic growth and the fastest period of productivity gains in the history of our country and maybe the history of any country. So, that's one where the knife's edge went the right way. On childcare, it's almost always gone the wrong way. Now, there is this, you mentioned the Lanham Act. That's sort of, I don't think of that as like we once had childcare, now we don't. I think of that as like we had a proof of concept. It proved itself. Why did we walk away? So if you go back to World War II, you guys have all heard of Rosie the Riveter, right? Mm-hmm. Well, why did we need Rosie the Riveter? We sent all the guys working in the factories overseas to fight in the war, and we needed to send moms into the factories. And we told women it was patriotic to go in the factories, but we had to do something with their kids. So as part of like a defense act, right? It was actually what's called the Lanham Act was actually the Defense Housing and Community Facilities and Service Act of 1940, right? This thing was designed to make sure that people who lived around the factories that were needed for the war mobilization effort were able to go into those factories, and so they needed childcare. So in order to increase employment, of women, which was a national priority at the time, they came up with the money to have free, universal, high-quality childcare. And guess what? The moms loved it. The kids loved it. The kids grew up who got access to it, because it's not every kid. This was in particular areas of the United States. It wasn't all over the US. The kids who got access to it ended up being more successful on average as adults than the kids who didn't. Like, it worked, and it wasn't that costly. But more importantly, it was an investment that at the end of the day paid off. And I think we have mountains of evidence. I mean, Reshma and Tim, we'd have to talk here for hours and hours if we were going to go through all the evidence of how investing in kids early on leads to higher wages and greater economic growth. We know that this is an investment that works. The question is, why don't we do it?
Yeah. So, okay, so is there any insight into then, so we know that it works, and then when the men come back, we want to push women out, is so we don't renew the act,
Yeah,
or what
exactly.
happens?
Like, it was a defense time act. Like, why does the Defense Department want to take some of its budget and pay for childcare? Like, that's but you know, we've studied it. This is long enough ago. These children have grown up, mostly lived their lives, and mostly passed on. So we actually know what happened. And you know, we saw high school graduation rates went up for those kids. College graduation rates went up for those kids. Employment as adults went up for those kids. You know, it was helpful to the kids. And I think when we talk about childcare, part of the problem is there's two things we're trying to do, and they get sort of mixed up. And instead of us saying, wow, here are two great things and two great reasons, it's like somehow neither reason works well enough. But the two things are, if we have childcare, then parents can work. And when parents can work, they can bring money into the house. And when you bring money into the house, that actually helps kids out immediately, particularly lower and middle income kids, where you make it just easier for that household income to be high enough that they can live a sort of reasonable standard of living. But the second reason is, it turns out kids actually do well when people, who are knowledgeable about early childhood education spend some time with them when they're young. Like my kids, and, Reshma, you talk about sending your kid into preschool, and, the benefits of preschool is not just like you have a place to put your kid, but actually your kid's learning really important skills about how to be with their peers and how to act and how to
wash their hands and cover their nose.
Right.
Yeah, it's true.
How to sing as a group, how to identify their colors, how to, play cooperative games, how to maybe sometimes play competitive games. Like, these are all things that we have to learn. And it is actually important that we teach kids at the time that they're most receptive for the right lessons. And I think of myself as a pretty good mom, but I wasn't an expert in what kids need at every single age. And I brought in experts, early childhood educators who could make sure that, when my kid was 3, they were learning the things that is age appropriate for a 3-year-old. And there's a whole body of research on that shows that, if you do age appropriate child development activities with kids, they grow up with greater skills, because you can't just randomly teach, what you feel like teaching them about at age 3. Like, there's things that their brain's receptive to and ready for. And then you're building a scaffolding that further learning is going to get built on. So we don't start with roofs and then come back and lay foundations. We lay foundations. And, early childhood education is all about laying the most solid foundation you can.
Yeah. When you have the experts actually weighing in on the curriculum the child's learning, plus the peer aspect of it, Betsey, you're really talking about an aspect where I know my kids really it was incredible, that pre-K year learning and seeing them develop, because, they were able to identify their emotions. They were able to identify how their peers handled things and then mimic, and then also learn from influence. And it really was in the environment of being fortunate enough to have a pre-K program that was publicly funded by the school district and by the state in and of itself. So it's incredible that you talk about this. Talking about the knife cutting both ways. It seems like it's been a really long time since the knife is cut the other way, meaning we're talking wartime, we're talking Nixon almost had something going on, Build Back Better was just on the cusp of actually doing something, but it doesn't feel like the knife has actually cut the way of public education and childcare in quite some time. The thing I always say is, it feels like we're still in an old farming system within schools, right? You got the 8-to-2 model. What parent stops working at 2? I have no idea. I'm sure there are some, but I can tell you the majority of people I know don't stop working at 2, and it becomes a thing of picking up your kid. It's, where have we not been able to get traction? Like, why has the knife not gone the other way to the positive in recent history that I can actually acknowledge and think of?
Yeah, I think, the US is so driven by like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And that's sort of how our political system operates. It's also like typically operates in a crisis, right? When you think about when was the last time we did something because we thought it was the right thing to do, rather than we were confronting a crisis and needed to take some action. So if we're constantly creating policy in a crisis, I mean, that's how the Lanham Act got passed. It was a crisis. We needed people to work. I feel deeply sad that the crisis that was the pandemic, it did create a moment where we might have gotten more for childcare, and then we didn't. And I'm not sure that it's going to be easy to do it now, because we're a country that governs in a crisis, and that crisis passed without us getting it.
Betsey, was it because we weren't squeaky enough? I can handle it if that's what you think. Is that what it was?
I mean, in some sense, it's got to be, right? Like,
yeah, I feel that way too.
The airlines got their handouts.
I do.
No, like, why? And I think the problem of childcare essentially comes down to the fact that when you need childcare the most, when it's the most salient to you, you're too busy struggling through it
and
to
exhausted,
be squeaky enough. And it's really going to be up to people who pass through this time in their life where they no longer need childcare. And I'm moving into that myself now. My kids are 10 and 13. And all of a sudden, with my 13-year-old, the school's perfectly fine to keep her till 6 o'clock at night, from 7:30 in the morning.
Right. After school activities, you've got it all now, right?
Like, oh no, she has chorus and she has volleyball and
such a good point.
It's so true.
But it's going to be up to people like myself as we move through it, as you have even more time and energy to fight on this, to just keep reminding yourself how important it is. And, the costs are real. People are not having kids because they don't know how they're going to afford childcare. And and that is not, that might be it's about childcare. It's about discrimination in the workforce. I waited to have kids because I didn't think I'd ever become a tenured professor of economics if I had kids too young. And, I wish I was able to have had 3 kids. But when you have your first kid at 39, it's not that easy to make it to number 3.
No, we're on this. I feel the same way. We're on the same schedule. I had my first kid at 39. I wanted 3, but now the shop is closed. So
I tell my daughter if she waits till 39, I'm going to kill her. But I waited because we are not a society that is welcoming of parenting. and that, like, we don't have an infrastructure for it. We don't have a workplace for it. And it is like fantastic that there's so many opportunities for women. But if we're not, I think we need to be approaching parenting as not a women's issue. It's a people issue. And we need, both parents to be playing this equal role as caregivers, and we need our workplaces to make the adjustments necessary to fit parents in. When I was in the White House, I was an advisor to President Obama in his second term, and this is what I worked on, was working family stuff. And I had a 10-month-old when I started, and a almost 4-year-old. And people would say to me, like, oh, how do you do it? And I was like, you know what I do? I go home. I got to see my kids before they go to bed. And I go home so I can see them. I don't always eat dinner with them, but at least I see them before I put them to bed. And maybe I get up early in the morning and miss them in the morning, but I'm going to see them at night. And I make sure I read that story, and I made time on the weekends. And, I never felt guilty, even if I left before other people, because I was like, you know what? This is what you have to do if you got parents with kids this young. And if you don't, then you're missing a really important voice. Like in your workforce, if you're like, oh no, everybody here's got to work 16 hours a day, well, you can't get an active parent. And that means that you need to know for sure that having that having an absence of parenting voices in your workplace is going to be the right thing for your business to succeed, or your government to succeed. And I think a lot of the times it's not. You need the diversity of voices that includes parents. And so we need to make these adjustments. Also, lives are long. Yeah. Working lives are long. Parenting is short.
Yeah.
It's so short. Most people will spend 50 years of their life working. Think about that, right? Because most people will take some kind of job around age 20, and most people now are working until age 70. So 50 years. What, you're going to have 2 kids, and they're going to be under 5 for 6 or 7 years out of those 50? Right. And we're fighting to get 12 weeks off of paid leave. That's 6 months out of 50 years. That's 1% of your work time, right? It's crazy. And the problem is we can't push our kids. We can't have our kids when we're that old, Reshma. We got as old as we could, and then you hit terminal time. So, we've got to be more open to the fact that people are still in the ambitious part of their career when they're having children. And we want to make the space for them to continue to be in the ambitious part of their career. And that means having an infrastructure like childcare, having an infrastructure like flexibility at work. And it means realizing that all sorts of people are going to wax and wane in terms of when they have, the gas all the way down and they're accelerating in their career. And maybe they're going to let it up a little bit for a year. We don't take them off course.
So what's your lesson from the pandemic, right? Because essentially millions of women were pushed out of the workforce because of childcare. We haven't fixed the quote childcare problem. Businesses learned a lot for a minute in allowing for flexibility, hybrid work, right? First, it was all about, there's no productivity loss. Then 2 years after the pandemic, suddenly it was like, there's all this productivity loss. We have to go back to where it was before, even though we recognize for a minute that what going back to where it was before is untenable for working women who are mothers, because in particular who are doing the caregiving work. So
let's just start with the facts, because the Federal Reserve just had its big Jackson Hole conference. And somebody presented research on what happened to productivity during the pandemic. Productivity declined in industries that require face-to-face work, and it really increased in industries that allow work from home. So there weren't productivity declines from working from home. It's the opposite. There were productivity gains in those work from home industries. what we see is people still want to work from home, and moms want to work from home more than just about anybody else. Parents want to work from home more than non-parents. There is a concern that this could lead to, sort of further gender gaps. But you know what? Women have been paying to get flexibility in the workplace for a long time. And now we're just sort of quantifying it by saying, oh, look, they're willing to give up. There's a recent study that found women were willing to give up wages more than men in order to get that workplace flexibility. But we've got a long history of research. Claudia Golden is a scholar at Harvard who's shown that, women don't choose investment banking because it's not very flexible. And as a result, they go into industries that pay less. Instead of becoming lawyers, women become veterinarians or pharmacists. Why? Because those are industries where, with a veterinarian, if you work 3 days out of the week, you make 60% of the money as if you made 5. So at least the ratio is fair. In investment banking, you try to cut your hours down by 10%, you're going to lose 60% of the money. That's the problem. So women have been paying for flexibility by moving into professions that penalize flexibility less, but pay less overall for a long time. And now we just have I think another dimension, which is some businesses that didn't used to let people work from home are going to now let people work from home, just gives them another place to get that flexibility. So I think in the long run, it's still good. I do. Even though it is going to be the case that women are going to be more likely to pay for that privilege than men are. I think that we've drawn attention to this as a national problem in a way that we hadn't drawn attention. And we've started to shift the conversation. So my hope is that we can continue to push on that. And let me give you another factual reality. Women have come back to work faster than men because women are still the ones that are really delivering when it comes to the US economy. Between 2015 and 2019, the fastest growth in labor force participation was among women, outpacing men. And we had hit the highest labor force participation of mothers ever. And we are easily on the way back to hitting those highs and exceeding them. And so this problem isn't going away because women aren't going away. They've invested too much. They graduate from college at rates higher than men. They have more workplace experience. They're having their kids at older ages, which means they're coming into motherhood with more years of experience in the workforce. So they're not going away. And my hope is that post-pandemic, we're going to keep agitating. And, I think we're going to see this November. Can women deliver at the polls when the Supreme Court takes a very fundamental right away from women, which is the right to make fertility decisions for themselves?
But I want to just ask you one thing, because what you just said, because sometimes people will hear what you said and they'll say, well, so they're back to work. Why do we got to fix it? Why do we have to offer them childcare? Why do we have to do more paid leave benefits? Why? I mean, they're back to work.
They figured it out. Yeah.
What's your response? Yeah, they figured it out. What's your response?
Well, one is that they're not having children. So we can put ourselves into one of those situations where we become one of these countries where we don't we have a very, very low birth rate, but I don't think that's sustainable. I mean, this comes back to the point, what is government representing? It's not supposed to it's not just representing the people who are here right now, what they want in this exact moment. Tim, you talked about people who don't have kids who are well, what's in this for me? Well, do you want to be able to eat when you're retired? Because you can save up all the money, but if there's nobody providing the food, then what are you going to do? We actually need the next generation if we want to live in retirement, then the next generation has to grow up and be willing to do the work so we can spend the money. Because all the money is a right to buy into the stuff that is currently being produced. And if we decide we're done with the next generation, we don't need no stinking next generation. And we got to work. And all we're going to get to eat is what we produce ourselves as we get old. So we actually need the next generation. And, you can end up like Japan, where they got washing machines for old people because they don't have people to wash the old people.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about, Betsy, is just, it just strikes me as like, it's a team sport. We're playing individually, like coming from either the collection of trying to advocate for childcare, right? We treat it like an individual issue, taking care of ourselves as we age. A lot of individuals just think, okay, well, I'll take care of myself, or I'll have the money to take care of or I'll hire somebody. But if there's not someone to hire, right, to take care of you, it doesn't matter how much money society is a collective. And I think a lot of people get so into their individual personality behind it that they go, that doesn't impact me. When in actuality, it does impact you. You talk about coming to the polls in November. What do you see in the future? Do you see it's possible to create this collective? Do you think society can have this moment of awakening where they go, okay, got it. We really need to I just feel like the world just needs to get smacked with a aha moment. And I would think that the pandemic would shake everyone and go, this is it. This is it. We have to take care of each other. You have to invest here. If not that, what? What do you think happens here?
Yeah. My hope is that I wish people could deeply understand the inflation we're facing right now has nothing to do with money and has everything to do with people wanting to buy more stuff, more goods and services than we can possibly make. That's what inflation is. We make a bunch of stuff, we have a bunch of workers available, and if people want more than that, it's going to get bid up. And so if we don't have a next generation, your money's not going to help you. Because everybody's going to be trying to find the workers that don't exist, right? We need to be in a sort of stable society where as you're aging out of something, somebody else is coming into it. So, maybe people will come to appreciate what it means to invest in a society. I certainly think younger people today really understand that there is this collective benefit to coming together. I do really, I see my students and they are different today. They really
Absolutely.
do seem to, they just watched, a really difficult, what should have been a really easy response to a public health crisis become incredibly difficult and lead to more pain than was necessary. And I think they're starting to understand that and trying to figure out how we bring people together to decide on what kind of society we want. I think the thing that worries me the most is that instead of coming together and deciding what's the United States of America going to be like, we're going to start to form smaller groups, right? And that might be at the state level, at the local level, where you can be like Massachusetts, where they dealt with giving everybody health care long before the rest of the United States did. Right. So we see other states are starting to take action on preschool, on childcare.
On childcare. Yeah. We just introduced a Marshall Plan for Moms bill here in New York City for universal childcare.
We are going to end up with a country where there's just massive inequality based on where you want to live. Now, maybe people will vote with their feet and try to relocate. And that will just lead us to be more sort of bifurcated. I do think right now the movement has moved to the state and local level. I guess at the federal level, what I would say is what we really need is businesses to realize that they would much rather deal with one set of federal regulations than 50 sets of state regulations that all differ in a way that makes compliance more of a pain in the butt. And then we could get companies actually working to get one uniform program.
Yeah.
And, that could happen. And the more plans you get across the state level, the more you'll get businesses agitating for one federal plan. I think the biggest problem there is then what happens is every state is like, no, we want to keep our plan. It's like, we want it to be our way. We don't want to, go back up into a federal plan. So,
especially if it like forum shopping for living in states becomes things that employees are doing because of the benefits that they're offering, or in the case of abortion, like I know my human rights are protected here, so that's where I'm going.
Yeah. I mean, the problem with the whole forum shopping is obviously, that's easier for higher income people to do. And so, it makes things even, more awkward at the federal level. I mean, we already have a situation where mostly states that vote for Democrats end up subsidizing states that vote for Republicans in terms of where our federal tax dollars go. And, at some point, the states that tend to elect Democrats and are building out all of these safety nets for their populations are going to get sick of doing that redistribution at the federal level. And so you'll get everybody on board with shrinking the size of the federal government. And I think the real losers there are, low and middle income families who don't find it easy to
can't afford to live in New York and California,
or can't pay the price, which would be to sacrifice everything they know in order to relocate, to Washington State. Right. So it's not just the hot, expensive states. And also there's plenty of places in California that aren't expensive to live. But, picking up and leaving your community, particularly when you rely on your community, maybe for that low cost childcare, the people who pick my kid up after school, that's expensive for people. So forum shopping is a privilege. Not something that everybody can do.
It's the infrastructure. Yeah. I mean, you're nailing it, which is a lot of the infrastructure for individuals resides in their community. Their parents live down the street. They are the childcare for when they're at work, right? They've got to take care of the older generation. They can't move away. They don't get the mobility opportunity, which is going to further just create the divisionalization. I completely understand. It's how do we avoid that end road? Like one of the things is you will see the states start to galvanize around their policies, the 50 states, right? You'll have some who will flight out to those states who have the mobility option, but many who don't. And then I guess it's the advocacy that needs to happen on the local level with people voting with the vote, right? It's to get out the vote. It's voting with their mouths. It's actually creating community forums. Is that would you say that's the big indicator of how to create it on a tapestry across the nation?
I think that.
Or do we burn it all down?
I'm stuck. I don't know. Like it's.
What we have to do when it comes to childcare and sort of other things for families is we have to be getting our act together and finding a way to turn whatever weird political crisis creates an opening for us, and then moving as fast as possible to take advantage of that. And we will face a crisis with Social Security. That is going to open up a whole can of worms around how do we fund retirement? How do we take care of older people? How do we take care of younger people? We could end up with another, a big recession. We could end up with a big world war. There are a lot of potential crises, and those, it's a time to make the case for investing in young. It's being ready to make the case to invest in young people when there is that opportunity. And, it doesn't feel like it's the opportunity is not there right now, right? Build Back Better, drop childcare, and we're about to face. There's not much happening in Congress. So we move things to the state level, and then we hope for a space to bring it back and to decide, hey, we want to look after young people. I'll tell you a fact that's one of the most to me, like hopeful but depressing facts, which is, before Social Security, the population in the country that was most likely to be in poverty was older Americans. They were the most likely to be in poverty. Then we passed Social Security. Now they're the least likely to be in poverty. So who was the most likely to be in poverty? Children. Then we passed the child tax credit as part of the American Rescue Plan, and child poverty fell in half.
Yeah.
But we just let it go. So now we're going to see a big increase in children going back into poverty. It really, it's depressing. It's depressing because
it's depressing.
What we really have to figure out is, how do we give children more of a voice in our political system? Do we lower the voting age to 16? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I would argue this is something we're thinking through I think the parents' rights movement is kind of only something that right now exists on the right. And so we have to embrace it, like on all sides of the political spectrum, and build
I totally agree.
And
I totally agree.
And redefine what it means to have a parent's agenda or a mom's agenda. And that's what we're working on at Marshmallow for Moms. But it's something, it's interesting that we've conceded that one side is the party of family values when that's not the case. And so we have to reclaim that.
I completely agree. I mean, and it's horrifying to me the way that the right has been able to galvanize this parents' rights movement. And I can see why it's successful. Like, as a mom, I want control over what my kids, I'm a controlling mom. I read. I'm like, no, you aren't watching this movie. No, you aren't doing this. Yes, you can read, in my household, my 13-year-old daughter's allowed to read anything she wants, but I still won't let her watch shows that are, and I'm like, look, it's totally different because video can make things look real and you become desensitized. If you have to use your imagination to imagine the sex or violence in the book, I'm okay with it. Right. But
that's great.
Yeah. And I get that I like having my freedom to make my rules for my kids on my kids laughed. I got so mad because one time at school when my daughter was in the 2nd grade, someone showed her the Minions movie without my permission. Can you imagine? Minions. And my kids are like, Mom, what's wrong with the Minions? I was like, well, they're really rude.
All right, Betsey, I'm making you a chapter head of one of my states.
But
you're perfect.
So I agree with you. Why? I mean, we need a movement on the left, which is we need to recognize that parents have preferences. Yeah. That's fine, and give them space, but then also make sure that there's space for the preferences of the parents on the left. I need my kids to know our full history. I need my kids to know, to treat everybody with respect.
I want my kid to wear a mask if he wants to wear a mask.
My kid absolutely should be able to wear a mask if I say they should wear a mask. Who are you to tell me my kid can't wear a mask? Yeah. It's the exact parallel, but somehow they're the party of parents' rights, and my rights are getting stomped all over. My kid has to go to school with somebody who's not vaccinated. That's a violation of my rights. Yeah. So I agree with you. I don't know how we take back this idea that, parents, need to be supported, and that they need a party that's doing what parents want. And even on childcare or early childhood education, all the proposals that the Democrats have put out have basically been choice proposals, school choice. But we don't talk about it that way. And yet we could have gotten a lot more, could have reached a lot farther into, conservative, independent families by saying, look, we want you to have the choice to put your kid in the childcare you want to put them in, but we want it to all be affordable.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, we do need a rebranding.
That's exactly right. Well,
rebranding, remarketing.
We do. Betsey, you gave us a lot of fodder to kind of start that conversation. So this has been such a treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Betsey, for blowing my mind multiple times. Thank you. Incredible.
It was great. Good to talk to you both.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Betsey.